Watchers in the Fourth Dimension.
But I'm the Doctor. The definite article, you might say.
How's a technical expression, Professor? It means that all microsectors are fusing in one great of molten metal.
Oh, what's the use? Could I have one of your pickles? I had a rush lunch.
Hello and welcome back to Watchers in the Fourth Dimension. I'm Anthony.
I'm Diana.
I'm Alan.
I'm Julie.
And I'm Riley.
This episode, it's time for our Tom Baker retrospective. Spanning all 7 seasons of his historic run on the show, we are once again joined by the legendary Sir Alan Siler, who will ably guide us through the era with some questions and maybe a game as well. And if you're really good, dear listener, I may even find a way to sneak in some stats.
Oh, that'll happen.
We're going to dispense with the mail this episode and go straight into our main programming. So, Alan, I'm going to hand it straight over to you, my friend.
Okay. Thank you all so much for having me in to do this again. It seems like it has been a long time since the last time we've done one of these. It seems like it's been an entire 7 years since the last time we did our Pertwee retrospective. And part of that is because we've just finished up with the longest Doctor in the show's history. But there's another reason, too. There's also, we had a little bit of a hiatus in the middle of this era. So, Anthony, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think as everyone knows, as we got to the end of season 13, we very sadly lost Don. And that hit us all pretty hard. We took a break, obviously, to grieve his passing, but also because he was a real wizard on the tech side and we had to figure out how to reverse engineer everything he did. So we took about 6 months off of the show. Actually, it was more like 8 or 9, I think. Before we came back and finished up the era, we then did 4 seasons as a 3-piece before bringing in Diana for season 18 as our newest co-host. So this has been a little bit of a choppy era, just in terms of the fact that we've changed up our cast on 2 occasions. But we very much consciously tried not to make assumptions of what Don might have thought about certain things, although I am fairly certain he would have absolutely loved season 14.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So let's just dive into this thing, shall we?
Let's go.
Done.
So, okay, Tom Baker. He was there for quite a while. And Tom is frequently cited as the most popular Doctor, particularly of the classic era. Now that you've seen his entire run along with the first 3 Doctors, why do you think he earned that reputation? And do you think that reputation is warranted?
I'd like to take a stab at this.
Stab away.
This might be slightly controversial, but
Do it.
Let's go. I thought about this one, and I think that when a person comes into Doctor Who, their first Doctor is always incredibly special because that's the one that pulled them into the show. Tom was on the show, as you said, for 7 years. He was a lot of people's first Doctor. So, therefore, it's very likely and very probable why he'd be so popular because he was a lot of people's first Doctor. Now, outside of that affecting his popularity, do I think that his reputation is earned as being the most popular Doctor, taking that not into account? I think so, but I don't think it is as clear and as much of a gap between him and perhaps Troughton.
Woo!
That's my controversial opinion. I'll fade into the shadows now.
Well, it's not that controversial because I fully share it. You took the words right out of my mouth. And the fact that it was so long that was going to mean that many, many children grew up with him being the Doctor of their childhood. And the nostalgia factor, there are childhood figures that I know are terrible that I would fight you over. And so that fervor is going to be there and it's going to pass and it's going to share because passion is shared. And he does have a very big impact on the show in general. You do see his legacy echoed in character choices throughout the rest of the show, even till today. And I think that impact in and of itself warrants that popularity because he was impactful. Was he necessarily like the best Doctor? That's going to be up to anybody's own individual opinion. I happen to love him. I love the character that he created for who the Doctor is and established such a central legacy of who the Doctor is. Even in his sternest iterations, there's still something about that I think that you can still see. And so I think it is warranted, but I think so much of it has to do with that shared nostalgia.
I had a slightly different take on it, not too out of the realm of it, but I think if you take away just the length of time, you also have to look at people who don't necessarily get introduced as a child or coming up from it from a different perspective. And another thing I like to think about is, okay, Hartnell. Hartnell, while I love him, is kind of a crotchety old man who's not the most personable. And so if people aren't familiar with 60s style or they're used to something that's more David Tennant-like, they're not necessarily going to latch on to Hartnell, right? Then you've got Pertwee, who feels like a sci-fi wannabe James Bond. I like Pertwee. I think going back and thinking about it, there's a lot of good things that I liked as a part of his run, but he's not the most original because he wanted to punch everything. And then Troughton, while still remaining my favorite, you have a big problem with the number of missing episodes, and so people don't latch onto it nearly as much because of how many are missing and the fact that it's in black and white. So if you're looking at this first 4-Doctor run, I can understand why people pick Tom as that really good classic Doctor, because if you're not used to black and white, you're not going to like the first 2. If you don't want the James Bondy punchy guy, then you're not going to like the 3rd one. So the 4th one is the one that makes sense.
So I think I have a slightly different perspective on this. Growing up in the UK in the 90s, yes, the 4th Doctor was still the most iconic one. I think the VHS release schedule heavily favored really the 3rd and 4th Doctors initially. So those stories kept getting pumped out and out and out. And you'd get people like, oh, I remember this show from when I was a kid. Let me buy this random story on VHS. Chances were it would be a Tom Baker one.
Mm.
I also think if you look at the quality of the Tom era on a season-by-season basis, some of those Hinchcliffe seasons, and I'm particularly thinking seasons 13 and 14, are some of the best examples of Doctor Who. You look at later Tom Baker, we thought that was kind of dicey, and we'll get into that when Alan gives me a few minutes on stats. But I think the era has really variable quality. I do know a lot of people who have childhood nostalgia from the 70s, which I certainly wouldn't be eligible for, given that I wasn't born until 87. But if you were hitting 7, 8 years old when seasons 13 or 14 were coming out, yeah, damn right you're going to think Tom was the best Doctor of them all. If you're hitting 5 years old when season 17's coming out, yeah, you're also going to think that Tom Baker was the best Doctor ever. I don't think his era was as consistent as Pertwee's. I mean, that's the thing we kept coming back to, with the exception of season 11 when Barry Letts and Terrence were too busy with Moonbase fucking 3. The rest of the Pertwee era is extremely consistent. There's not a huge amount that is stunning, but there are a couple. But everything is at least a basic level of good until you get to, I don't know, Death to the Daleks or something. So I think just the way Tom's era hits, and Alan, to bring it back, the 7 years, I think, to echo Julie, that is a lot of people's childhoods and hitting those critical ages. Yeah.
I just want to throw into that, too, that particularly here in America, there was years and years and years where when you're in the PBS era and Tom is just shown over and over ad nauseum. And there are some markets that really never showed anything but Tom. So for a whole entire generation of Americans, that's the Doctor that they knew.
Yeah, talking to my dad, who was never really a fan of Doctor Who, although I've gotten him to do the binge watching the Christmas episodes every Christmas because he doesn't get a choice. The only one that he knew of was, you mean the guy with the scarf?
Yeah.
So to your point, Alan, even people who weren't into Doctor Who, they'd still be like, I think I might know what that is. Is it this guy?
Mm-hmm.
So you're right on that part.
And I think that's also attributed to the amazing costume design that is that scarf, because it's very much iconic. It is the one thing that is still associated. Everybody knows it. People who don't engage with the fandom at all are vaguely aware that that is a thing from that sci-fi show. It's become that ubiquitous. And I don't think that has necessarily much to do with Tom Baker himself. I think that anybody in that tenure with an amazing costume design piece like that was going to have that piece. But I do think the scarf has a lot to do with the popularity also of how it's perceived.
Yeah, I agree with that. So we've now had 2 long-running lead actors, Pertwee at 5 years and Tom at 7 years. So we're doing this at the end of season 18, and out of 18 years, 12 of those years were 2 doctors. What impact do you think that had on the show and on its audience? There's whole generations that only ever saw these 2 guys.
I think it sets up an expectation, doesn't it? I mean, if you're looking at it from the perspective of going into now the 5th Doctor, if this is all you knew, you're expecting that that actor will be with you for at least 5 years.
Yeah.
But now we know that is not the case. So I think that was the major impact. And also it allows to build a familiarity. As you begin to watch the show, it's harder to get pulled in by a new person playing the Doctor if perhaps they're only there for what feels like a very short amount of time. So I guess maybe for people that were Troughton fans back then going into it, maybe they weren't too keen on Pertwee to start. But I bet by the 4th year, he had pulled a lot of them in at that point.
You know, it's interesting coming at this from watching the show in order from the get-go, because I went back and looked, and when you look at just number of stories, the first 3 Doctors is not that different. Yes, the 2nd Doctor has a few less, but I think Hartnell had 29 stories, and I think Pertwee had 29 stories. So if you're watching this back to back, it's a very different experience than if you were living it in real time.
That's absolutely true.
And if Troughton hadn't had endless 6 and 8 and 10 parters, it probably would have been 29 stories.
Right.
Agreed. But it's just a very interesting thing to think about from my perspective. It doesn't feel that different. Tom's, yes, because it was, I think, another 10 stories. Very different, I suppose. But when I think about the others, I'm like, well, it took about the same amount of time to cover everybody. And it never felt like Pertwee had this really long-standing one because he just didn't have as many stories per season.
Yeah. Good point.
And that's just a very different experience than those living through it when they're spending only 3 years with Troughton, but 5 with Pertwee. And those 2 years, that's a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think it, to your point, almost sets up this expectation that the next Doctor will be there for longer. And I know there's always the question when a really loved Doctor leaves is, can the show even carry on without them? I know that's the question that the higher-ups at the BBC were asking after Tennant left, and they allegedly thought about cancelling the show.
Mm-hmm.
And the way in which they let Tom go, it's really disappointing. So that's on them.
I do think after this amount of time, it is time for some fresh blood.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in the Tom Baker era, we've had 3 producers, and that's Philip Hinchcliffe, Graham Williams, and John Nathan Turner. This is the 3rd time that we've had a Doctor that's governed by multiple showrunners following the Hartnell and the Troughton eras. And spoiler alert, it's also the last time that's ever going to happen. Do you think a single showrunner gives more stability or consistency to an era, or do you prefer to see a different take, an influx of new ideas or approaches throughout that Doctor's run?
All right. This is my very complicated opinion.
Oh, no.
Well, it's not that complicated, but I think it really somewhat depends on how long the Doctor is there for. I think when you have Doctors who are maybe only doing 3 seasons, having one showrunner gives you a feeling of a complete story. They're able to finish all of their ideas, and you have something that's very consistent. And even with Pertwee, I do like the consistency aspect. However, once you hit into the 3 to 4 season mark, you start getting a little bored because the stories are very similar. They're very much the same. And while consistency is good, there does come a point when I think it stops.
Yeah.
From my personal opinion, if you're able to predict that you're going to have 3 seasons, let's say, I think that having one showrunner can work very well. But I think that when you start getting into more and more seasons, it's like, please give me something new.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, makes sense.
I think Julie just took the words out of my mouth with that one. I was thinking down the same path. I was thinking also that, and you were alluding to it, when you know you're going to do just a 3-season run with one particular Doctor, then you're right. You need one producer, one showrunner to create that overarching story, that narrative for that Doctor. And then because you actually have a beginning, middle, and end there. But if you're going for 7 years, and back then I don't think there was the idea of a plan for what to do, how to move this character through 7 years of television. So in that case, yeah, you do need to change it up. You need to make it fresh constantly.
Yeah, I agree. No notes. Good job, guys.
Great job.
A+.
Yeah, I broadly agree, but I do think the opposite is true as well. If you think about the Hartnell era, I do think it lost a little in having 3 producers over the course of 3 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
I would have liked to have seen Verity stay on for longer, for example.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting to me about the Hartnell era, recognizing that this is the Tom Baker era retrospective, so I don't want to get too caught up on this, but a lot of that turnover is in the 3rd season. So you get to Dalek's master plan, and then after that, you have the magnificent failure of the John Wiles era. Doctor Who's greatest villain in the Hartnell era, John Wiles. Whereas I think here, 7 years, 3 producers, that seems reasonable. Hinchcliffe did 3, Williams did 3, wish he hadn't, but he did. And Nathan Turner came in for the last one.
So since we're talking about these essentially three different divisions of Tom's era by showrunner, which story do you think sums up each one of those chapters? And not necessarily your favorite story, and it might not even be the best story, but the one that best represents each period.
I got this one. All right. Number 1, Brain of Morbius. That is just classic gothy horror. God, I love the sets on that story so much. And I do actually really, really enjoy that story. For the second period, I'm going with the Sunmakers because it's when things got kind of goofy and weird. Not weird enough, but just kind of goofy and weird. And this is when I feel like we had a slight inconsistency starting there. And then right at the end, I'm going to go with Full Circle because of Adric. No, I think Full Circle because that's like the only time I feel like in season 18 where we have some bit of stability. I know we add on Adric, but we still got Romana. We aren't dealing with Romana's goodbye serial. We're not bringing in the Master. So it's like the only time where there's a bit of stability in that season. So that would be for our 3rd period of the 4th Doctor.
I have a slightly different perspective on this. For Hinchcliffe, yeah, it's going to be Pyramids of Mars or Brain of Morbius for me. Again, it's the gothic archetype that works really, really well. And you add a sci-fi spin to it. No notes. Completely agree with you, Riley. For the Williams era, I'm going with Nightmare of Eden. It's stupid. The acting's terrible. The special effects are not great. And yet there's still something very charming about it, which I think sums up the Williams era quite well.
Yeah.
Now, I have the advantage or possibly disadvantage of knowing what's to come and how long John Nathan Turner stays. And I think the way to look at his era is it's not just about him, but about who the script editor is as well.
True.
So this is the Nathan Turner and Bidmead era. And what is the apotheosis of the Bidmead style? Well, I'm sorry to say it, it's Logopolis.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Okay.
Yes.
Yay.
It's fine. He's no longer script editor after that, so it's okay.
Okay, good.
Oh,
that's too bad.
Makes me happy. No. Okay. All right. I will also agree with Pyramids of Mars and or the Brain of Morbius. I think Pyramid of Mars is a better representation. However, I prefer the Brain of Morbius. I am going to choose a controversial one. Well, I think for our audience, maybe not for us, because I got to give me some props to Underworld.
Hey.
Oh, yeah.
And I know a lot of people don't like it, but what I liked about it is that there was a lot of boundary pushing that happened with all of the special effects that they were attempting to do. I thought the plot was great. In some ways, I like Bob Baker and Dave Martin. Sometimes, maybe not. Sometimes I do. And this one I loved for some reason. And I'll give it props for that. Mainly, I just wanted to talk about it and say, hey, all of you listeners out there, you're all wrong. And I mean, in this latest season, while I would love to say it's the Leisure Hive, it is unfortunately not. But yeah, I'm either feeling full circle or something along those lines is probably what's going to end up what we feel more than some other things.
So this run is really long.
Yeah.
And I don't get paid to watch Doctor Who, so I did not necessarily sit down and watch the entire fourth run.
Should have negotiated a better contract when you came on board, Diana.
I know. I didn't ask for the terms and conditions, and now I'm wearing this collar. What do I do?
Nice.
Did you at least get a safe word, or did we forget to even give you that?
Look, you didn't give me one.
Yeah, sorry.
That's why I was so trepidatious of it. So I didn't go back and watch everything, / just didn't really consume any of it outside of what I've already know. And the last time I watched it, I wasn't watching it in terms of analyzing it for the producers. So it's interesting to me that even looking back in my memory of not having really watched the Fourth Doctor solidly in about 10 years, I still can feel the ebb and flow of those change in producers, but I wouldn't be able to tell you which episodes directly correspond to each one, just because I wasn't looking at that then. But I love knowing that Logopolis is kind of peak of these guys, because my love for Logopolis will never die. It was so stupid. It was so good. I loved it so much.
Oh boy.
Logopolis and Adric forever.
Forever.
All right, so now we're going to turn our attention to the companions, and we have a kind of a unique situation here. After the departure of Sarah Jane Smith in season 14, we begin a 7-year period that is dominated by non-Earth companions. That includes Leela, K9, Romana, Adric, Nyssa, and one more that you haven't met yet. Well, actually, 2 more that you haven't met yet. One of those I don't count, and you'll understand why when you get to it. It's frequently said in the new series by Russell or Stephen Moffatt that they don't do non-Earth companions or non-modern time companions because audiences would have a hard time connecting with those people, identifying with them. Okay, well, that kind of answers the question. What impact, if any, do you think that this run of non-Earth companions had on the show at the time?
So I've said it a bunch since Adric came on board. As an 8-year-old kid, the idea that in a few years' time I could be a 14 to 16-year-old and traveling the Doctor, I loved that, and I loved Adric because of that. And I think that really shows how you don't need a modern-day Earth companion for segments of the audience to relate to them.
I mean, my favorite companions are not that.
Backing up Julie's point, because she's made that point before, I find it really interesting how Doctor Who is such an imaginative show. And yet, as you said, RTD and Moffatt don't think that the audience has enough imagination themselves to be able to watch it if it didn't have someone that they feel like they could connect with because they're a modern time human being.
Yeah.
That's kind of shocking. I can understand that if it was a different type of show. Granted, you wouldn't necessarily have this problem of who your characters could be from anywhere at any time, but I just find that is, I don't know. I feel like it has nothing to do with where they're from or what time they're from. It's all about how they interact with the Doctor.
Yeah, it's kind of patronizing because I think, this is a day where you have bingeable TV and some really good, really well-made sci-fi and fantasy. And you don't have a modern-day character in Star Trek. You don't have a modern-day character in Game of Thrones. And yet audiences love both of those shows.
Yeah, and I find it really annoying, and really the actual question of what impact, if any, I think it hasn't had enough impact, because I wish that RTD and Moffatt could get over themselves and do something about it. Again, a lot of great companions are not from Earth. You've got your Jamies, you've got your Vickies, you've got any number of people. Romana is one of those long-standing characters that everyone talks about, and they think they're not relatable.
That's kind of my question, is I wonder where they've gotten this concept from, because similarly to looking back at why Tom is so iconic as the Doctor, when I look back at classic companions, I definitely have my favorites because I've seen the whole thing. But again, when you're talking to people who might be tangentially associated with Doctor Who, kind of are aware of it, in classic Who, they're going to know K9. They're kind of aware of the lady with the fur bikini. And,
I know I am.
Adric is so polarizing. People know about him. He's a polarizing character. Romana, people have opinions on. They are characters that we talk about, whereas maybe some of them go by the wayside. We're not talking about others as much.
We're not talking about Dodo?
Right.
Who is a modern day companion.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so, considering that they are so popular, these companions are so popular, where do they get this perception that off-Earth characters won't work?
Yeah.
Where do they get it from?
And just to cut in on that, since we're looking at it from the perspective of Moffatt and RTD, they love themselves some season-long arcs involving the companion.
Yeah.
I enjoy that too. But what could open up a whole nother world of possibilities is if your season-long arc for your companion wasn't based around a human situation that we're familiar with. It could literally be anything. Sorry to just pull up some old nerdy stuff, but there was an episode of Star Trek where Spock, our non-human character, suddenly basically has, what do they call it? I believe they called it Vulcan puberty or something, and he had to go back to his home planet.
Ponfar.
His personality changes, and they had to do this. Well, you know what? You could do that. You could do something as imaginative as that and just do that as your season-long arc. There's a lot more opportunities than just always tying the Doctor down and the stories down to some sort of, I'm not saying this is criticism of last season, but, it is a rather cliched story about who's my real mom. So there you go.
Oh, you mean why I'm not fully caught up yet?
The other thing to keep in mind is, and Diana, I don't want to speak for you on this, given that you haven't been here on the full ride, but with the other three of us, all three of us have been pretty vocal about some of our companion crushes.
Oh, for sure.
And not one of them has been a modern day companion. Julie, for you, it was Jamie, who's obviously an 18th century Scotsman. Riley was Leela, who is a, 50th century savage. And for me, it was the first Romana. So I just don't buy it at all.
Yeah, I check box all the above.
Right.
That's fair. If I were to have probably any of the female crushes, Leela and Romana are up there in the female crushes. Babs is just, I can't diss my original Babs. I love her.
And we all know how much you love Harry.
Yo, I had forgotten about him.
Almost as much as Captain Yates.
Adric's the closest we're going to get to another Harry, isn't he?
Shut up.
I might like Adric more than I like Harry.
I can see that.
Wow. Yeah.
Because he's a kid. He doesn't know any better. Harry's a grown-ass adult.
That one. Sorry, Alan, we're going off the rails.
Oh, that's all right. I don't mind.
So yeah, more non-Earth characters, please. Because RTD and Stephen Moffatt are definitely listening to us right now.
Yeah.
No, they do. Okay, so let's talk about some monsters. Tom's first season featured Daleks, Cybermen, and Sontarans, but also introduced a couple of new threats like the Wirren and the giant robot. After that, though, we enter a long period of mostly no returning monsters. We got one more appearance of Daleks and Sontarans. Do you think that the show suffered in any way because of this? And did you find yourself missing any of the old favorites?
No and no.
Nope, don't miss the old favorites, man. Where's going to get a sex pest shrimp? That's how you get sex pest shrimp.
Right.
However, they should have brought the Zygons back.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
It's a crying shame it took them 25 odd years or however long it was, 30 years to bring them back.
And they look worse. They looked better in Classic Who, and I will die on this hill.
I still think original Sutekh looked better, so...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Very disappointed that new Sutekh didn't have the chair hand.
I don't like Sutekh as a character as much as you, Anthony, but he did look better.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely think there are some monsters I would love to have seen back. I'd love to see another appearance of the Krynoid, for example. We got some really good monsters in the rest of the Tom Baker era that we just never see again.
Right. Okay, so I've got one last question for this segment. And first, I've got to give a shout out to Guy Lambert. I had these questions like literally months ago. I was like, oh my God, I can't wait till we get to the Tom retro. And I thought of in fact, I've pared it down from 100 questions that I had on my list. Like, oh my God, I could ask about this. Because in Tom, there's so much to talk about. And then when you did the season 18 wrap up, Guy Lambert pitched a 2-part question. And I messaged Anthony and I said, no, these are already on my list for the Tom retrospective. So, Guy, I am not stealing your question, but I wanted to acknowledge that you had also asked these 2 questions. The final question is, did Tom stay too long? And if he were to stay around another year, what would you like to have seen from an 8th season of Tom Baker?
I think that I would have had no problem with Tom staying an 8th year if that 8th year was hit the heights of season 12 or season 13. But I don't think that was going to be the case, so it was time to move on.
Yeah, I think it really suffered from the fact that he wasn't enjoying the job anymore. And I think especially with something that requires as much passion as the Doctor does, you really have to be into that character to portray it. And the second that you're not loving it anymore, it's time to go because you're not going to produce good content.
I loved season 18 Tom. After 3 seasons where Tom was completely off the chain, his ego was running wild, he was doing what he wanted to do, he even just basically fucked off for half of the Horns of Nymon and let Romana run the show. Clearly because Tom just couldn't be asked. I really liked the kind of quieter, angrier 4th Doctor that we saw in season 18, and I wouldn't have minded getting an extra season of that version of the Doctor. As to what would I like? Difficult for me to say, knowing that my opinion is so clouded by the fact I've seen season 19. I wouldn't want as much of the Master as we've been getting, with 2 stories on the trot now with him, and it's already been spoiled in the episodes when we've talked about the production. We will be getting another one to kick off season 19. I would generally like less of the Master. I would really like to see where this kind of bold new vision that was started by Bidmead and Nathan Turner goes with a new script editor who is maybe a little less science-based, but still very focused on just good scripts and good storytelling.
Yeah, and I think to some of those points, if we could have dropped some of those really bad stories, combine some of those seasons down a little bit, I could probably handle another season of Tom. But some of those stories were actually really hard for me to get through because they were so off the chain, but not in a fun way. Just kind of cringy, right? I don't want my Doctor Who to be cringe. But there were definitely episodes that I thought were starting to go down that path.
Looking at you, Invisible Enemy and the Horny Shrimp.
Stupid goddamn horny shrimp. No, because we needed that for reasons. But I do think that it could have been interesting seeing how this last season of Tom went. It could have been nice to have gotten a little bit more of that. But after the 7 years, I'm done.
All right. Anthony, it is time for my favorite segment of these shows. It is time for the stats.
Dread it, run from it. Stats from 7 years of 4th Doctor stories arrive all the same.
And I'm being serious. I literally do love the stats wrap up. I honestly do.
Alan, you're my kind of nerd.
There you go.
All right, well, we're going to keep this relatively short, so we'll start out with our running metrics, and over the course of the Tom Baker era, we added a whopping 100.5 points to the camp count, bringing us up to a total of 222.5 for the entire show. And 32.5 of those 100.5 points came from season 17.
Particularly from Nymon.
We added 3 points to the I'll Explain Later count, which brings us up to a total of 8. So we haven't quite hit the heyday of that, but it's a-coming. Query, we only added an additional 10. So we've had a total now of 28 quarries in the show so far. I think the Pertwee era really was the heyday of the quarry.
Yeah.
We added a whopping 95 jelly babies to the count, which brought us up from 2 to 97.
Those bags really do come in handy, don't they?
And, of course, let's not forget, because we haven't talked about it in a while, the Philip Hinchcliffe women count.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
It's been
So
a while.
Over the course of the 16 stories that he was responsible for across 3 seasons,
Oh, no.
there were just 13 speaking women who were not regular cast members.
Gosh,
God,
that is
damn.
so sad.
Amazing scripts, terrible representation in terms
Yes.
of just the number of women.
Yes.
And because I don't know how to write for women.
That was Robert Holmes's excuse here. I just want one last opportunity to say it. Where are the women, Phil?
I'm just saying, all you have to do is write the part for a person and cast a woman. That is literally all you have to do.
Yeah.
That's what happened on the Reboss operation. With the Seeker, that role was written for a man, and the director said, Robert Holmes, screw you, I'm casting a woman.
Yep.
Anyway, in terms of scoring, and I'm not going to go too in depth on this, but I will say our highest scored season was season 14, which got an average score of 7.78 and is the highest of any season in our entire marathon so far.
Awesome.
At the other end of the scale, our lowest scored season was season 17, which got an average of a measly 5.47, which is the lowest of any season so far. So the Tom Baker era truly was the best of times and the worst of times. In terms of individual stories, we had 7 that managed to make their way into our top 10 stories of all time.
Wow.
The Robots of Death comes in at number 1, The Brain of Morbius at number 2, and The Stones of Blood at number 3.
Whoa.
At number 6, we have Terror of the Zygons. At number 8, we have The Face of Evil.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
At number 9, we have City of Death, and at number 10, we have Genesis of the Daleks.
Yeah, that's strong.
Okay.
Yeah.
Outside of the Tom Baker era, number 4 was season 6's The Mind Robber, number 5 was season 5's The Enemy of the World, and number 7 was season 8's The Demons.
Yeah.
So Tom has come in and cleaned shop in the top 10.
That's amazing.
Now, stories that were nudged out of the top 10, we have season 6's The War Games, season 5's The Tomb of the Cybermen, season 7's Inferno, season 4's The Evil of the Daleks, then season 10's The Green Death and the Three Doctors, and season 2's The Dalek Invasion of Earth.
Oh,
wow.
So Tom pushed out a lot of really good Doctor Who.
A lot of absolute classics.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, in the bottom 10, and just as Tom was very well represented in our top 10, he is quite well represented in our bottom 10, where The Horns of Nimon, The Invisible Enemy, Revenge of the Cybermen, Meglos, and The Creature from the Pit all feature in our bottom 10.
Yep. All deserved.
That is rounded out by, this one's debatable, season 3's Galaxy 4.
Oh, no.
Wow.
I want to give a caveat on that. That is our original score. Right. It scored a lot better when we rewatched it with the animation.
Absolutely.
Season 4's The Smugglers, which none of us remember watching.
Didn't exist. Doesn't exist.
Season 11's The Monster of Peladon. Season 6 is The Dominators. And then our worst Doctor Who story of all time, The Space Pirates. And I will say, Meglos and The Creature from the Pit did come in joint second last to The Space Pirates. So our list of clunkers is half Tom as well. So it really is a tale of two halves.
Well, I think that kind of reinforces, to go all the way back to the top, why he's so impactful. Is because of how many good stories, but also how many absolute trash. Because you remember the bad as much as you remember the good, and kind of you put some distance between you and the episode, and you giggle, and you're like, that was so bad.
But also, it's interesting to think about the ones that end up in the top 10 and the ones that end up in the bottom 10, which of Tom's eras they came from. Because it's almost like a solid line between those top 7 and those bottom however many that was.
The only exception up at the top is, well, there are 2. Stones of Blood and City of Death.
Stones of Blood. Oh,
Stones of Blood, so good.
It's so good.
All right. With that, Alan, I will hand back to you.
All right. Well, we've got a few minutes left. We can play a game.
Yeah.
Everybody ready for a game?
Let's do it.
We are going to be playing Would You Rather. So some of these get a little dark because it's all about your impending death. And some of them kind of emphasize this is a really long era, so it kind of emphasizes some of the tropes that got repeated during this 7 years. So we're going to start with, would you rather have your life force slowly drained by Magnus Greel or be quickly but violently murdered by a robot of death?
Oh, I'll go with the quick death, robots of death. A quick death from the robots of death.
Yeah, every time.
Always a quick death.
I think I'm the same. I mean, the slow one you might be able to think you could escape from, but no, you're not going to escape. Just take the quick one.
Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly. Would you rather be sacrificed to Kroll or be shot in the dick by K9?
I don't have a dick, so let's go.
Yeah, that's a swing and a miss.
I guess this is really
Figuratively
focused on
speaking.
us, Anthony. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Be shot in the genital area by
Exactly.
K9.
I don't know if those people that get shot by canine, I don't think they die. I just think they're in a lot of pain and they're just kind of disabled. So I'd like to keep on living. So
There you go.
Take your best shot, canine.
I'm not dead, just very badly injured.
I'm not dead yet.
Who shoots a person in the dick? Honestly.
I'm glad you got what I was going for, Riley.
Would you rather be stuck in a time loop saying fire over and over again with the Atrios General, or be caught in a chronic hysteresis waggling K9's tail with the Doctor and Romana?
Oh, I mean, obviously, I'd rather be with the TARDIS gang if I'm going to be stuck in a time loop. So
Okay.
Yeah. Who wants
Yeah.
to just say fire all the time? Like
Fire. Fire. Fire.
No, please stop.
that's my ringtone.
Right.
Wait, you still have a ringtone?
Yeah, you can make your own ringtones.
You're not like everyone else who has decided that, no, I no longer want a ringtone, don't call me? Because that's where I am.
Yeah, but Julie, Riley is Gen X, we're millennials. There's a generational gap here.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Okay.
And I'm a damn boomer. We never had ringtones. Would you rather be impersonated by a Zygon, be impersonated by an android, be impersonated by Meglos, or be impersonated by a Rutan?
Oh, no. Oh, no. A Zygon. Why not? Let's go.
I'm going
Yeah.
with Zygon on that one.
You see, I'm going with the android because the Zygons put you in
Oh,
that
right.
little alcove thing.
Yeah.
The Rutan kills you before it impersonates you.
Yeah, definitely not
And
that.
Meglos does this weird thing where it like merges with you.
And then you're covered in pricks.
Yeah, exactly. So the android, you're wandering around doing your own thing. The android's wandering around doing its own thing. You don't know anything about it until you come face to face with yourself.
That's fair enough.
That's a
Yeah.
good point.
There you go. Well thought out. Okay, this is my favorite of these. The Doctor has left you in the company of a crazy, eccentric old lady. Would you rather roam the local village collecting money from art patrons with Amelia Ducat, study the old ways in a village cottage with Mother Tyler, or ride your bicycle around the countryside at night with a sausage sandwich in one hand and your trusty policeman's truncheon in the other hand with Professor Rumford?
Oh, it's Professor Rumsford.
Oh,
I was going with
100%.
Ducat. I don't know. That just seems like, I don't know, something like American Pickers or something.
Right.
No, you get a sandwich in the last option.
The sausage sandwich does bring something to it. I do like the fact that with Mother Tyler, I do get to have tea all the time, and I have a pet owl. And the
Ooh.
pet owl is a really interesting idea there. I'm that much closer to going to Hogwarts, guys.
Right.
I have held that owl.
The only problem with Mother Tyler is that you'll never have any seasoning on your food because they threw all the salt at the Fendal.
Well, you shouldn't be just using salt anyway. So, like, let's bring
Yeah.
in the pepper and basil and all the other things.
Yeah, salt's not the only spice.
No, it's not the only, but it's a pretty good one.
So speaking of these three batty old ladies, just to take it back to an earlier comment about Philip Hinchcliffe and his lack of women, if there were more dotty old ladies
Oh,
in the Hinchcliffe era, can you imagine
Yeah.
how good Pyramids of Mars would have been with one
Oh,
of these women
yeah.
in it?
Oh, yes.
It's all it needed.
I've always said Pyramids of Mars could have totally had an old lady on there just yelling at all the British professors.
Yeah.
And it would have been beautiful. Absolutely, 100%.
Okay. And our final question to wrap up our game. The TARDIS lands in front of you, and the Fourth Doctor steps out and asks you to accompany him on his travels. Would you rather it be the Hinchcliffe Doctor, the Williams Doctor, or the Nathan Turner Doctor?
Hinchcliffe Doctor, because I found that Fourth Doctor was more of that just straight up Bugs Bunny type of character in those early seasons of the Fourth Doctor. So that's my pick. And also my first thing I would do when I would hop on there I know this is too early, but I would ask, where's Leela?
I'm going to completely disagree because Sarah Jane Smith is effectively brutalized for 2 seasons, and I don't think I really want to go through that myself. I'm going to say the Williams era because that really does seem to be the Doctor at his silliest, and, then I might get to travel with Romana as well. I'm down.
Yeah, I'd be afraid that if I stepped into the TARDIS during the Hinchcliffe era, that I would just poof, disappear. My mouth would disappear, or, something really critical would happen to myself, and I would not enjoy that. So I definitely pick that middle era just because I do remember the middle being funny, and if I had any shot with Mary Tam, I'm going to take it.
Okay, you guys have changed my mind. I'm going with the Williams era because that's where Leela actually is. So
Exactly.
I was like, wait a second, you're going...
I was blinded by just the gothiness and the old horror look.
Just imagine how grateful Leela would be if you saved her from the horny prawn.
Oh.
Well, no, let's be honest. Leela would save Riley from the horny prawn.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, good point.
Just going to throw that one out there because I'm totally down with that, all of you. It's going to be the Williams era because I either get Leela to protect me or I get the sassiness of Romana. I win.
Yeah.
Everyone wins.
I'm really surprised. I thought that it would not be Williams for any of you, so I'm pleased by that.
Seems the safest.
Yeah, that's true.
So, yes, the episodes... Some of them might have been terrible. However, when I look at who all is involved, I'm like, it's not that bad.
Right.
And I might not lose my sight. I like that. I like being able to see.
I love how none of our rationalities had much to do with the Doctor.
No.
Exactly. That's why I didn't think it was going to be the Williams era.
No, for sure. Yeah.
So that wraps up the Fourth Doctor era, and hopefully, if you all are willing, I will be back in 3 seasons' time to talk about Peter Davison.
We'll have you back for some bonus episodes before then, Alan.
A retrospective about the dish of the day.
Oh, there you
Took
go.
the words right out of my mouth. Every time we talk about him, please know in my brain, automatically it's dish of the day. Forevermore.
Outstanding. Well, Alan, thank you so much for joining us. Before we sign off, where can our listeners find more of you, should they so desire?
Well, hopefully they will desire to go and visit my website at cosmiccreative.com, KOZMIC creative.com, where you can launch from there into the other podcasts I do, including my Doctor Who podcast, plus the books that I've written and published for other people, and some other good stuff. We got a lot of big things coming in the way. Got a new Star Trek book coming out and a new Beatles book on the way, so go check it out.
And on Alan's other shows, just a special shout out for Modern Musicology, since yours truly is often on there with Alan.
That's right. It wouldn't be the same without you.
One of these days I'll come back on when you cover scores. Do scores. Please cover
We'll
scores.
get there one day.
We will. We'll get there.
Well, that brings us to the end of this show. And Alan, great job on not having this be 3 hours long. So you did better than any of us would have.
I was afraid that it was going to be that because I had so many questions. I really had to hone them down a little bit.
Well, we will be back for our next regular episode when we will be talking about K9 and Company before we get into the Dish of the Day era. We might have a bonus episode before that, depending on how things shake out. We'll see. If there isn't, please don't be disappointed. It will be coming soon. But in the meantime, thank you as always for listening. We have finally made it to the end of the Fourth Doctor. We started this way back in, I think, July 2022, maybe? Oh, no, August 22. So It's been a hot minute. So we're finally moving on to something new. So do join us next time for K9 and Company, and then 2 weeks later for Castrovalva as we kick off the Fifth Doctor era properly. But in the meantime, thank you so very much for listening. And of course, as always, have a good one.
Woo.
You have been listening to Watchers in the Fourth Dimension with Julie Philippek, Riley Schreck, Diana Burney, and myself, Anthony Williams. This episode, Where Are the Women, Phil?, was recorded on Wednesday, the 29th of January 2025. If this is your first time listening into the show, all of our previous episodes are available wherever you like to get your podcasts. You can interact with us on Facebook and Instagram at @Watchers4D, and you can also email us at watchers4d@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, please do subscribe and consider leaving us a review or rating on your favorite podcasting app. All of those things really do help the show. And always remember, still one more episode before the dish of the day.